art style is one of the most important parts of this project, at least to me anyway. And game designers are probably screaming at their screens right now that art comes later, but I disagree. I mean, it's not necessarily that I disagree, it's just that there are no rules here. I'm a million times more comfortable creating visuals than I am designing games, and so I guess I'm just leaning into my skill set as a crutch early on. I can iterate artwork just as I'd iterate gameplay, so it's no big deal. Until it's printed, nothing's set in stone anyway. There are lots of moving parts to this project, and it would be easy to get overwhelmed. I've become more and more engrossed in thinking and daydreaming, if I'm honest, about the lore, which is something I didn't anticipate happening. Even at this early stage, I can sort of feel a lean towards this whole thing becoming a more in-depth world-building exercise, with the card game basically running in parallel to that. Because there's going to be so much tweaking and refining of the game and the art style, I think the lore can act as something that can be quite grounding, almost operating like a brief for the art and the gameplay. Before Kaiju Origins was ever going to be a card game, it was just drawing kaiju. So obviously I've drawn some kaiju already, and you've probably seen some in other videos. I'm not 100% wedded to that style, and I would like to spend some more time thinking and critiquing it, and thinking about what I want from the whole vibe of Kaiju Origins. I want to spend some real time considering this, because I think you only get one chance, right? Once it's published and printed, you can't change things anymore. So I think with a project like this, there are two main things to consider, or two key components. The first is the visual identity, and the second is the illustration style. And these are separate, but they do need to feel connected, and they need to be able to sit together seamlessly. So this is going to be a two-part episode. In this part one, I'll talk about the visual identity, and then in part two, I'll kind of address the current state of, it's chaos, basically, with the illustration style of the kaiju, some early kaiju. And yeah, that's right, this is still just the intro, just finishing now, so that's me bumbling along. Someone said in the comments that I was something about my bumbling narration style. I'm not sure if that's meant to be endearing or what. It might be something to do with just like the English accent or what, but I didn't think I was bumbling. I don't know, maybe I am. Let's establish what a visual identity actually is. This might seem pretty obvious, and I apologise if you already know all this, but for those of you who don't know, creating a visual identity is establishing an appropriate look and feel for a certain project or brand or company. It's sort of like making building blocks that allow for the identity to be accurately and easily replicated in various scenarios. We're talking about things like a typeface, logo, colorways, how imagery looks and if it's treated or not. And then you usually get some rules about the usage of these assets in print and on screen and so on, and that'll all be collated together in some kind of guidelines document. So you'd end up with like a big folder of assets and a guidelines document, and that's basically what I do as my day job. So I probably won't bother going into that level of detail and doing, a guidelines document for Kaiju Origins, unless it needs one day, but at the moment I think that's probably going to be excessive. You will have noticed over my earlier videos this type of artwork on my thumbnails and in all the videos, etc. so far. It's this sort of 1-bit CRT monitor type pixel rendering stuff. Nicely described. This is the basis for the Kaiju Origins visual identity, and the aim is that hopefully you can kind of see this visual style from afar and recognise it as Kaiju Origins. But if you were to stop and think about it a little bit longer, you might start to ask yourself,
but why?
What's the relevance of this 1-bit chroma shifted pixel art? What's the relevance to Kaiju? And you'd be right to ask that, but there is a good reason for it, aside from the fact that, I think it just looks cool. Before I get onto that, I will just confess at this point that I do love pixel art and retro video game graphics, especially like old DOS RPGs or NES games. So I will admit, there is a little bit of personal nostalgic motivation behind this creative solution. But pixel art is just beautiful, isn't it? There's something about that minimal and considered positioning of like single pixels to make an image read correctly that's just really appealing to me. I mean, look at these examples. This is by someone called Lumpy Touch, and it's just incredible. You know, it's so simple, yet every pixel is considered. And you look at something like this and yeah, you see a monster and yeah, it looks cool and whatever, but something else in the back of your mind, some other recognition triggers in the background, and it's a recognition of skill, of effort, and of mastering a craft. And these pieces are by Momo. Again, it's just beautiful stuff. It's a minimal palette, like perfectly rendered. And this stuff, honestly, you know, this stuff just blows me away. It's stunning. It's so much harder to achieve than you would think. I'd love someday to get artists like this to illustrate my kaiju and to make like a pixel art TCG video game. How cool would that be? Maybe one day. But yeah, to me, pixel art, it seems to sit at this intersection of art and graphic design. And when you think about it, graphic design at its core is just pushing shapes around until they sit nicely together and describe something. And so is pixel art. So look, there's absolutely an element of this 1-bit style being something I'm into, just like kaiju. But then why would I be creating something I wasn't into, right? I wouldn't. But also, I wouldn't just do it for the sake of it, and I think this is crucial. There is also precedent for these visuals in the lore. What are the logistical effects of trying to get a society up and running again after a large-scale nuclear war? No, none of us really know, but I'd imagine a ton of infrastructure would need replacing, and there would be a need to return to some fundamental basic survival skills like, you know, farming and growing food, subsistence, probably purifying water and waste disposal and, you know, more and more things until before you know it, you're basically playing SimCity. That's the kind of survival side of things, but a large-scale nuclear war would also have catastrophic consequences on our technological infrastructure. I don't think humans would or could abandon technology entirely. I think humanity would still require computing technology to advance these new societies. You know, we're so dependent on modern technology to facilitate our development. Without it, there'd be a huge frustration at not being able to, I don't know, like make calculations or solve problems quickly enough. Modern devices, though, the stuff we use today, particularly microprocessors, depend heavily on intricate and delicate silicon-based semiconductors, and it's likely that these nuclear detonations and the resulting warming and radiation would probably fry the integrated circuits in these modern microprocessors. Things like communication towers, servers, satellite connections, they'd probably also, you know, be destroyed or at least rendered useless. So we'd be in a bit of a jam, basically. Unlike modern chips, though, with their nanometer scale components, older electronics like the kind of stuff that you'd find in the 80s and 90s, it might be more resistant due to their kind of larger, more robust architecture. I mean, I'm no computer scientist, so don't hold me to this, but it seems feasible, and that's what sci-fi stands for, right? Seems feasible? What I'm getting at is that this could lead to a return to this type of older technology. With modern electronics now being kind of largely non-functional, the older tech could potentially still operate and be more easily repaired and replicated. I'm sure there'd be little, you know, I can imagine little ramshackle repair centres set up in the underground cities where kind of weird little technicians rebuild and overhaul this salvaged tech and, you know, even like augment it with kaiju biomatter and stuff. And I can see all this in my head, but that's for later. Because on top of this, there's also the not insignificant fact that advanced silicon-based technology requires silicon. It requires not only silicon, but extremely pure silicon, which has to be produced in incredibly high-tech facilities. And these facilities would also almost certainly have been destroyed, probably even strategically targeted in the war. And if any do exist, they'd probably be above ground and at risk of kaiju attack, and so the infrastructure needed to mine and process and distribute the silicon to the required standards would just not be achievable anymore. Again though, these older computers use less refined materials and components and more kind of mechanical housings and accessories that are easier to manufacture in less than ideal conditions and could probably be scavenged, you know, repaired and repurposed quite easily. So you're probably thinking, okay, yeah, well that sounds good, but if we're using old tech, how can that be efficient productivity-wise? These older machines are not capable of anywhere near as much processing power as the more advanced tech that we use today. Well, mushrooms. Stick with me. Just as the war reawakened these sleeping giant kaiju, it also had other effects on the biodiversity of the planet. I mean, we are talking like catastrophic terraforming levels of destruction to the planet, followed by tectonic shifts, extreme weather events, and eventually the beginnings of regrowth and reclamation by nature. Mycelial networks are the underground root-like structures of fungi, and they are real-world marvels of nature, and they already exist. If you haven't heard of them before, check out a documentary called Fantastic Fungi. It's pretty mind-blowing stuff. Mycelial networks in the real world right now transmit signals through electrical impulses in a way that's a bit like a kind of biological internet. The electrical signals which fungi use occur in bursts as well, which sort of resembles the way that neurons fire in animals' brains. And they do this to actually communicate with each other, and not just each other, but neighbouring organisms as well, like plants and trees. Some research has even claimed that fungi have intelligence. Enough intelligence to actually be able to make decisions. And that's now, today, in real life. In the world of seems feasible, well, what's possible there? After the war, these mycelial networks boomed in growth, evolving and advancing at a tremendous rate, almost as if fighting back and trying to heal the land. They developed a sort of supernatural omnipresence, suggesting sentient intelligence. In the world of kaiju origins, humans have augmented their own retro tech with these networks, manipulating the natural signaling properties for structured high-speed data transmission and harnessing processing power from the electrical impulses of these massive organic structures. Incorporated with this old tech as an interface, but also organic matter harvested from kaiju, the humans have been able to kind of piggyback on this rapidly evolved mycelial network, enabling super processing abilities unlike anything the silicon generation ever could have offered us. I think it's super exciting, this idea of this massively evolved mycelial network, and I'm really excited too about this idea of biomaterial integration with tech, because there are kaiju remains too. You know, these could be fashioned into sort of organic semiconductors or form the basis for new materials to be used as clothing or building materials, you know, stuff that's maybe more resilient to things like radiation or EMPs. But more significantly, this organic matter would be harnessed to again enhance the computing power and connectivity of the more archaic computer tech. So you like imagine these kind of clunky beige QWERTY keyboards and phosphor glowing CRT screens with fungus and strands of organic matter flowing out of them. And I think as well, by the time humanity has integrated this advanced kind of biotech, that clunky retro aesthetic would already be sort of deeply entrenched. Engineers would have no time or motivation to refine the interfacing mechanics because, you know, they'd probably just continue designing around older interfaces for compatibility, and because that's what's familiar, and also because it's very utilitarian. Remember, this tech is inherently, it's functional, it's a survival tool. It's not being marketed or sold to anyone like smartphones or an iPad or any of the tech we know today. There's no capitalism. This is purely a means to an end, facilitating communication networks, enabling scientific research to help with medicine, safety, alert systems, all sorts, you know. We are rebuilding society with the tools that are available that we can scavenge and human ingenuity. But where does the power come from? Well, I don't think it would come from any one place. I think there'd be numerous methods for generating power. So the most exciting option, certainly in terms of narrative, is probably again through harnessing kaiju physiology and the mycelial network. Kaiju biology presents the possibility for unique bioenergy systems. Perhaps their physiology somehow provides energy through means inspired by real-life biological and chemical processes like bioelectricity harnessed from kaiju or mycelial neural systems. Humans could harvest parts of kaiju nervous systems or specialized organs and somehow convert them into biological batteries or bioelectric generators. The sheer scale of these kaiju means that any type of bioelectric fields that they might generate could be extremely significant. And what about, and again, bear with me here because this might be a little bit gruesome, what about kaiju blood? Kaiju blood as a fuel source? Maybe kaiju blood could contain strange, mysterious compounds or isotopes that serve as energy-rich fuels, similar to how hydrocarbons power engines. Perhaps their physiology actually metabolizes radiation or something, allowing their blood, their fluids even, to act as a sustainable power source once refined. It's crazy, I know, but, you know, it might just work. Yeah, this is the stuff I think about in the shower. And look, this video is becoming very, very lore-focused, but again, you know, I said the lore influences the art style, and kind of what I'm thinking about now is there are so many possibilities, because what does this do for narrative hooks as well? Think about the moral dilemmas this might throw up. Does humanity have the right to exploit kaiju as energy sources? You know, they are living, at least semi-intelligent beings, even if they are seemingly motivated by violence and destruction. Same for the mycelial network. You know, if it does have a sentience, what ethical concerns does that raise? I mean, do we now exist symbiotically with it? And if so, what benefit does it get from us? Or are we just exploiting it? In which case, are we just a parasite? You know, there's just so much. Oh yeah, it's tasty. But you thought this video was about the visual identity, didn't you? Well, it is. Everything I've just explained is my silicon failure hypothesis, which, unlike the visual identity, was simply named because it sounds cool. And so these 1-bit pixel-style graphical elements are created with this repurposed retro tech in mind. So there you go, that's the inspiration. So we're taking into account the graphical limitations of the retro technology that would be in use. And we got stuff like the origin icons, which are the recognized categorizations for kaiju. And I imagine them integrated as like glyphs into typefaces, as actual characters that, you know, appear universally across all languages and character sets. So there's no excess flourishes or detail with the typography or the iconography. It's just purely functional, just like everything else in this kind of society. And like kind of old 1-bit pixel fonts always were with old tech. But the great thing is, like, these elements, when combined, give me good potential to use as things like patterns, to animate, and to layer with other artwork. I mean, if you take the thumbnail for my first video, for example, I think that the imagery and the 1-bit style integrate quite well here. This was the first time I'd integrated imagery of kaiju with this 1-bit style, and I never intended to do it that way, but it, you know, it kind of works. And what I'd like to do is to continue experimenting and exploring this. And I'd like to try and integrate some more organic, mycelial-based imagery into this concept, because I think that juxtaposition of the digital with the organic could look really nice, and it would also work well to describe an overview of some of the foundations of the lore, because it's not just about the retro tech, right? You know, there's this organic element to it as well. And perhaps that imagery is something that I create organically, as in, you know, not on a computer, using physical materials and then scanning stuff in, even like scanning in actual mushrooms or something. I don't know, you know, and then combine that with a digital aesthetic. It could work. So yeah, there's definitely something to consider there. I've also been adding some noise, scan lines, phosphor glow, and chroma shift to really create a kind of a grade for the imagery that brings to mind that feel of the graphics being on an old CRT screen or something. So also there's a little bit of an elephant in the room, or not in the room, as the case may be, and that elephant is colour.
The image you create is not of colour.
I've always struggled with colour. I mean, well, not really struggled with it exactly, but it's more that my go-to, the thing that I like the most is doing things in black and white, or at least monochrome. I feel like every time you add colour, you're saying something, like evoking an emotional response.
Color's better on you.
And obviously, you know, that has its place. It's a really useful tool, don't get me wrong. It's just, I'm not sure I want to evoke any more than this at the moment. There's a whole conflict in my head about whether the kaiju should be in colour or black and white, and I will go into that in more detail in part 2, but also there's this concern, this kind of overarching concern of you need colour to attract people's attention. And that's something that I have fought back against a little bit as a designer, you know, and it's something I'm not 100% sure I agree with. Perhaps if you're trying to create like $1 billion Wizards of the Coast card game, it'd definitely be a bit risky to go entirely black and white. But I think something indie like this, you know, black and white can be cool. There's a really great little card game that I bought last week called Necro Hamster, and that's all black and white, and I didn't find that it jarred too much. It's hard to say though, you know, I'm undecided at the moment and I don't want to rule anything out, but it is one of my top concerns moving forward actually, because I think it is something I need to establish early on in order to avoid having to redo artwork. Maybe that integration of organic mycelial imagery with the pixel digital imagery could be somewhere where colour could come from. Like tendrils of branching synapses and root systems of multicoloured threads intertwining and meshing with these 1-bit pixel shapes, maybe. Yeah, I'll try some stuff out. Maybe I'll make a video about that actually. So that's the visual identity, and this aspect I feel is in a really good place at the moment, this aspect of the project. I feel happy with the aesthetic and I feel confident in the direction. Unlike the Kaiju illustrations, which is a whole other beast.